Greetings again, everyone, and greetings to all of those who will be seeing this telecast sermon a week from today. And they will be all over the country, and hopefully a few other countries around the world will receive a tape of this. If you had been a parent in Scotland the other day, and if you'd have known in advance what was going to happen, there would have been a lot of things you might have done. Some of those parents apparently understood that the man who was instructing little boys in a gym was not the kind of person they wanted to be around their children. But who could ever have imagined, especially in a nation like Scotland, where we just don't think that such things happen in a small town, that a man would go inside with 4 guns in his possession and empty them, saving one last bullet for himself, and kill 16 little boys and girls and a teacher. Just absolutely unbelievable things that happen from week to week in this world. If you would turn to Ezekiel, the 9th chapter, a familiar scripture to many of us, there is a prophecy here of a man with a writer's inkhorn that has a task of going through the city of Jerusalem and of making a mark. It's obviously the opposite of the mark of the beast. It's a unique kind of a mark. The original says, "Mark a mark," and we'll come to that in a moment. He cried aloud in mine ears, verse 1 of chapter 9, with a loud voice, saying, "Cause them that have charge over the city to draw near, even every man with his destroying weapon in his hand. And behold, 6 men came from the way of the higher gate, which lieth toward the north, every man a slaughter weapon in his hand." Now he saw this in vision, but it was about the impending destruction of Jerusalem. It has happened several times in world history. And unfortunately, there is yet to come another destruction of the city of Jerusalem. And one man among them was clothed with linen, and those are priestly garments, with a writer's inkhorn by his side. And they went in and stood beside the brazen altar. And the glory of the God of Israel was gone up from the cherub whereupon he was to the threshold of the house. And he called to the man clothed with linen, which had the writer's inkhorn by his side. And the Eternal said unto him, "Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and mark a mark," as it says in a margin. "Make a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof." I would imagine there are millions of Americans, regardless as to their church affiliation, that when they saw that shocking news on television the other day, if they didn't sigh, many of them also cried. I know I certainly did, and I imagine a lot of you, or most of you in this audience, did. But how do you sigh and cry for all the things that are going on, not only in our own community or in our own state or our own nation, but around the world, if you are not informed, if you don't know what is happening? The window to the world of most people today is, of course, television, that there are others, a good daily newspaper, a weekly news magazine. One of the best would be Newsweek or U.S. News and World Report, not necessarily the Henry Clare Booth Luce Times Catholic publication, but whatever you choose. Many people take other publications that are ultra-right-wing or conservative. There's one called The Spotlight that seems to be fascinated with the Trilateral Convention and various conspiracy theories. There are white survivalist and white supremacist publications. There are many others, but to get a broad spectrum of everything that is going on in our country and the world, I would suggest, like the 3 that I've mentioned, a good newspaper, weekly news magazine, and CNN or headline news. Jesus said in Luke 21:36, "Watch you therefore, and pray always that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things." Now that's interesting, that there is a condition upon being counted worthy to escape all these things. And we'll come to that in a moment, because he had just specified what things he was talking about. The Greek word watch is agrupneo, and it merely means to stay awake or be alert. There are other scriptures in the Bible that talk about being watchful, but he says, "Watch you therefore, and pray always." Now obviously you've got to take time out to sleep and to eat. It means without ceasing. It means a habit of prayer. It means not giving up on prayer and persevering in prayer. "That you may be accounted worthy." Then if you don't watch, are you not accounted worthy? If you're not alert, awake, and aware, are you then going to be unworthy to be able to escape all these things and to stand before the Son of Man? If you'll turn to 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 6, well, I'll read up to that. 1 Thessalonians 5, beginning in verse 1, of the times and the seasons, brethren, Paul told the church in Thessalonica, you have no need that I write unto you, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night, like a break-in that you're utterly unaware of. You're sound asleep, the thief is prying open a window, and he is stealthily robbing your home, and you don't even know it, you're still sleeping away. For when they shall say, peace and safety. I just finished an article the other day, and I brought in what was happening down at Sharm el-Sheikh, that you know was captured by the Israelis early on in the Six-Day 1967 war, and is way down there on the very end of the Sinai Peninsula, the entry up into the Red Sea. And President Clinton and dozens of world leaders from all over the world were there making declarations of peace and making a united statement against terrorism. And they admitted while they were there that terrorists are virtually impossible to stop. Terrorism has come home, as we know, to the United States. The Oklahoma City bombing was the biggest shock that I guess America has ever received because it was so utterly unexpected, and it was unexpected in a place such as the heartland of Oklahoma City, and there was such a terrible loss of life. You're familiar with the Twin Trade Towers bombing and the trial and the incredible work that some of the law enforcement agencies did to track those people down, and they were Islamic fundamentalists. But when it is people among us who want to attack a federal institution because of real or imagined outrages against the federal government, it's very, very hard to understand. Now people are debating a bill that has to do with anti-terrorism that the President wanted to sign, and the House apparently and the Senate are not going to go along with at least certain items of it because it infringes upon people's freedom. We live in a free country. That carries a price. If we want to be completely secure and safe from all crime and all acts of terrorism, there is no way to do that except in a prison-like environment where everybody's life is controlled and there simply are none of the personal freedoms that we enjoy. So there's the other side of the coin. And it is a very delicate balance between the two. They are saying, world leaders are saying, peace and safety. We live in a time where they say peace, peace, as it says in both Jeremiah and Ezekiel, when there is no peace. Then sudden destruction comes upon them, as travail upon a woman with child. There's one thing a lady who is almost full term knows, right to the bottom of her soul, she knows that sometime soon now she's going to deliver a child, and there's no escaping it. It will come as travail upon a woman with child. It is certain, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief. Who is in darkness? How many people out there haven't the faintest idea about the identity of the northern 10 tribes of Israel, about the identity of the democracies of northwestern Europe or of Germany, about the scenario in biblical prophecy of the book of Daniel, Daniel 2 and 4 and 7 and 11, of Revelation 13 and 17 that describe the two great beasts, the image of the beast, and of course the 17th chapter that describes the great false religious system. They have no idea what to look for, what to watch for, where to watch, where to look. You know, when I was choosing a masthead for the magazine that we're sending out, we may have to go to newsprint like we did before for a time, tabloid type, because it's only 8 cents a copy as versus about 32 cents a copy. And unfortunately, even though I hate to do it and hate to have to do it, as I said in a letter, sometimes the economies simply dictate that you must do that. But when I was looking around, I thought, my dad had a knack for choosing some very wonderful names. The World Tomorrow, what a great name for the radio broadcast. And The Plain Truth. He liked that because it just cut right through. It wasn't the pure truth, but the plain truth. The Good News, that means gospel. Well, I got to thinking that all the good names were taken up. And I thought, well, I remember Life. Of course, there is Time. There is Newsweek. And then I remembered there was one called Look. And then I remembered that scripture in Luke 21:36. I said, wait a minute. There's the Watchman. that is up on the corner of a watchtower. And I'd heard of a watchtower because I knew the people standing on streets would try to either, I guess they give that away to you. So I thought, what about the one word watch? And we investigated and looked around. We didn't know of anybody that had that name, and that has been the name of our publication. We're very glad that it is, because it connotes exactly what this is all about. You are the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. In the 13th chapter of the book of Luke, Luke 13, we will see how Jesus Christ led into, I'm sorry, I should say Mark 13. Did I say Luke? I meant Mark, excuse me. Luke 21, Mark 13. They're all the parallel accounts of the Olivet prophecy. When he said, "Watch you therefore that you might be accounted worthy to escape all these things," he had just finished recounting in Luke 21 and verse 36, all of the events of the Great Tribulation that lead up to the day of the Lord. He had talked about nation against nation, wars and rumors of wars. That's Mark 13, verse 7 and 8. It's almost identical to Matthew 24. Nation shall rise against nation, verse 8, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be earthquakes in divers places, and there shall be famines and troubles. The question is, as he gives these specific signs, how do such things impact you and me? Do they impact our lives, the life of those in God's church at all? Well, there are people here who are veterans of World War II, veterans of the Korean War. That certainly impacted them and their families. There are those in the church whose sons and fathers were in Desert Storm. There are those in the church who were in Vietnam, and that certainly impacted them. We get letters from mothers who are worried today about a son that is over in Bosnia. We get letters about families that are torn apart when a person is in the inactive reserve and forces are called up because of a trouble spot that can even be a rumor of a war that caused, once again, massive dislocation of families, an infusion of ships and planes and troops into Saudi Arabia when Saddam Hussein once more made threatening gestures, war games along the southern part of Iraq, and it was taken to mean that he was going to attack once again into Kuwait. And that was merely a rumor of the possibility of a war, and it cost billions of dollars. How do famines affect you and me? Well, food stocks in the United States, government reserves, up into the hundreds of millions and the billions of dollars, massive airlifts. The Berlin airlift is the only way that starving populaces were saved during the Russian blockade and the clampdown. And we know what happened in Angola. We know that the United States spent billions of dollars and sent tens of thousands of troops over there. And what was accomplished once they had pulled out? They actually had to have other armed forces go in to help the armed forces that were there disengage because of the warlords, and to help them back out with their weapons and much of their equipment, or most of it. So it does affect the national economy, and it does affect us. As I've said before, there is no such thing as a small war to the people who are involved in them. And our nightly news shows us what is happening all around the world. There shall be earthquakes in diverse places, and up and down the so-called volcanic chain, or the ring of fire that surrounds really the whole world. When you look at the mountains of the world, there are increasing earthquakes and volcanic activity. These are the beginning of sorrows. But he says, verse 9, take heed to yourselves, for they should deliver you up to councils, and in the synagogues, that's in the churches, religious organizations, you shall be beaten, and you shall be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them. And the gospel must first be published. It doesn't mean printed, but that can be implied. It really means preached. It means merely spread abroad among all nations. And when they shall lead you and deliver you up, and that deliver you up to be afflicted, as it says in Matthew 24. We're told not to take any thought beforehand what we shall speak, neither do you premeditate. For whatsoever shall be given you in that hour, that speak you, for it is not ye that speak, but the Holy Spirit. In a time of such duress, in a time of economic collapse, a time of warfare that always interrupts everything, the infrastructure of society is destroyed. Look at Sarajevo as a quick case in point, and you're familiar with it. Ruptured water mains, exploding buildings, shattered walls, homes blown up, no public services, hospitals shut down, people going to a ruptured pipe in the middle of town with a mortar round landing amidst them when they're there with a pitiful little plastic can to try to get some water to take home to cook, probably over wood in what used to be a living room because there's no electricity, there is no gas, and everything is simply total destruction. And that is the conditions. At a time like that, what happens to people under extreme stress and duress? What happens to people? Verse 12, now the brother shall betray the brother to death. People begin to look at the immediate means of survival, and they're willing to do almost anything to cling to this human physical life, to a few of the pleasures or comforts of life just a little bit longer. And the father, the son, and the children shall rise up against their parents and shall cause them to be put to death. That is how virulent religious intolerance and hatred can become. And of course, you know, there are people that are moving out of the area in Bosnia that are actually setting fire to the homes they used to live in bitterness because they're saying, if we can't have it, neither can anyone else. And it's a pitiful thing from a standpoint of the religious intolerance and hatred that is over there, and I won't belabor that. You're familiar with it, and you see it each week on television. And you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that shall endure unto the end, whether that's the end of his life or the end of those conditions, the same shall be saved. Then he got specific, and we've covered that. We have literature on it. I preached about it for years. We know the abomination of desolation was set in place by Antiochus Epiphanes when he dedicated the altar to Jupiter Olympus and sacrificed swine. We know that when Jerusalem was destroyed in 71 AD, the Romans set up standards at the city gate and over the temple. And we know that Jesus said there is yet another abomination of desolation coming, and Paul spoke of that in 2 Thessalonians 2. That is, in a nutshell, the movement of a great false prophet into a place called the holy place. Either a temple that is yet to be built, and that's a distinct possibility, or a pavilion over a cornerstone. What would cause that? I've covered that in a recent Bible study tape and in sermons in the past. Massive loss of life in Israel. What would coalesce and bring together all of the various factions of extremists and religionists? The government is irreligious and the bulk of the population is irreligious in Israel. What would cause them to dedicate a temple and begin sacrifices once again? Well, silkworms or scuds falling on Tel Aviv with chemical or biological warheads might do it, but some massive upheaval in the Middle East. Now, if the blasting of a bus with a dozen and a half or so, or whatever it was, 30-some people, and I think there was something like 90 people in 4 attacks in a matter of about 6 or 8 days over there in Israel that died. Someone with a pipe bomb wired around his stomach that walks into a crowded shopping mall, if that doesn't get your attention, if you live there, if you lived around the corner, like my son was over there in Jerusalem for a period of time, and I know he was aware of various terrorist activities. And from time to time, we would worry and we could be concerned about that, not worry where we were frightened because we felt that God would protect him. But I know that when my folks and I and my brother were touring Israel, I believe it was the day before we got up to Capernaum and walked through the foundation stones and the floor of the old synagogue that was there during Jesus' time, there was an American tourist who had simply walked out a little further over toward no man's land, and a Syrian sniper shot her with a rifle. And that brings it home when you're close enough to something like that. When you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, and just like Matthew did, Mark says, let him that readeth understand, because of Daniel's prophecy. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him that is on the housetop not go down into the house, neither enter therein to take anything out of his house. So the picture is of something that seems already to be in place. Given mass communications today, people usually have a warning of at least a few hours, if not a few days or even a few weeks of impending warfare. In Desert Storm, we had months, which is really stupid of Saddam Hussein when you think back on it. If he'd have been any kind of a real strategist, we could have had a lot more trouble with him than we did. This seems to be just exactly what the 11th chapter of Daniel implies, that the king of the north will come into that land, not necessarily to destroy it, but as a protector. And the great false prophet will say it's time for the great holy mother church to return to the place of her origin. That he would then set up what he's always called for, a separate city within a city. And we know, and there's coming out the next issue of our publication, that there have been ongoing, behind the scenes, diplomatic relations between Israel and the Vatican, that people very high in the Israeli government have proposed Vatican control over the old city and the holy places so they can prevent it from being a bone of contention between the three great monotheistic religions. And that may come to pass between now and the turn of the century, or a very few years thereafter. It could happen extremely swiftly. Let him that is in the field not turn back again for to take up his garment. It's a normal day. Suddenly, there's a different thing in the air. Suddenly, people are aware that something is about to happen. And they're not to even go back to their home from their factory or their shop, or if they're out in the field, but just to go where they are and to get out of the immediate environs of Judea or Jerusalem. But woe to them that are with child, and them that give suck or are nursing mothers in those days. And pray you that your flight be not in the winter. Then he talks about the great tribulation. He said in verse 28, learn a parable of the fig tree. When her branch is yet tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. And we can say that now. I guess the first day of spring officially is very shortly ahead of us now. And because we had a very warm January and February, the leaves all budded out, and probably an awful lot of peach orchard owners are very heartbroken because they blossomed out so early, and along came hard freeze about 3 days in a row, and it killed an awful lot of them. But we have little buds and blossoms all over the yard, and all of our trees are blossoming out. So in like manner, when you shall see these things come to pass, know that it is nigh, even at the doors. Now Christ said to people that heard him say it, and it was only 40 years away, that this generation shall not pass till all these things be done. And there was a typical fulfillment, Josephus writes, of the tens of thousands of Jews whose bodies were smeared with bitumen, who were then set afire and impaled. And he said the nighttime streets were lit up with the bodies of suffering, dying Jews. There was a massacre like we cannot believe. But this is typical of what is yet to occur, and as astonishing as it sounds, Jerusalem is yet again to suffer a terrible attack, and the actual literal fulfillment of Jesus' words that not one stone would be left atop another have never been fulfilled, because there are many stones over there that are still atop one another in the original old wall of the Herodian period where Jesus walked and where he taught. And that is yet future. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. But of that day and that hour knows no man, not even the angels which are in heaven. So next time you have a would-be prophet that gives you a scenario and tells you he knows exactly how it's all going to come down, how it's going to happen, you just tell him, well, even the angels in heaven don't know that, so how could you? Neither the Son, but the Father, even Jesus Christ, according to his own words, does not know the exact day and the hour, the exact moment when God the Father is going to say, now is the time, and send Christ back to this earth. As I've said and pray continually, even so come, Lord Jesus, thy kingdom come. It can't be soon enough for me. Take ye heed, watch, and pray, for you know not when the time is. And then he gave the analogy of the long journey and told his porter to watch. Verse 35, watch you therefore, for you know not when the master of the house cometh, at even, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch. Now how do you do that? If you're a shut-in, living in a mobile home in some Midwestern state, as I said, you've got a window to the world, television. You can at least, I'm sure, get a hold of publications, although many people, believe it or not, cannot afford a daily newspaper. Many people cannot afford a telephone, and many people cannot afford a subscription to a weekly news magazine. It's just too much money for some people that are living on welfare. But so many millions of American homes have television, and you can certainly find out from other people what is going on. And then you see how you are personally impacted, but more importantly, how other people are impacted if you are one who is going to sigh and to cry for the abominations that are occurring all around us. Are you aware of the threats against the upcoming Olympics in Atlanta? Have you heard of that? The terrorist threats have been received. Personally, I don't think I will go. When I found the other day they'd arrested a man in Ohio who, get this, had forged and then had printed documents that identified him as some kind of a biology laboratory, had sent off to other large laboratories, and it ended up with a concoction, some kind of a soup, a biological mixture of some kind, that would have spread bubonic plague. And it showed the container and the label on it, and here was a man, he's one of these white supremacists, he's one of these survivalists, one of these people that believes in all kinds of government conspiracies and so on, and I believe that they still have him, but they arrested him. I couldn't believe that. We're all aware of deadly sarin gas on Tokyo subways. But what annoyed me, and this is one of the things about our freedoms that I suppose is annoying, I can't help it, was when the news media went over all of this, they took pictures of the Atlanta subway. And they showed, and other people then would come along and say the same thing I said, you know, you think, well, the news media is planting it in the minds of some of these really weird, way out people over here of what their target ought to be and how to attack it. They showed pictures of this beautiful, new, glittering Atlanta subway train going by, and then they talked about the sarin gas on the Tokyo subway and talked about terrorists threatening the Olympics, and here are going to be, I guess, hundreds of thousands of visitors from all around the world that will be there. Well, this brings it down to a pretty personal level when he talks about people betraying one another and what is going to happen at the time of the Great Tribulation. What happens to people who betray each other, who betray a beloved family member or betray a church member? Does the betrayer know that he or she is a betrayer? I don't think so. I don't think they admit to themselves that they are. I don't think they agree, I am a traitor. No, I think the anger, I think the hostility and the resentment that boils up inside of them blinds their minds and blinds their eyes to what they're really doing. And I think that they have allowed a root of bitterness to get into their heart and mind, and they've begun to justify their actions. I cannot understand otherwise Jesus' words when he said, the time will come when they that kill you will think they're doing God a service. Neither can I understand the crucifixion of Christ, the death of Christ himself, by those who were shouting out to crucify him, and thought they were doing God a service. No, I think people justify themselves and make excuses for themselves no matter what they really do. What was the prophesied condition of God's church to be at the time near the second coming of Christ, near the time of the end? Let's go to Matthew, the 25th chapter, right quickly. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. Now, this is a different kind of a wedding and a different kind of society than you and I are familiar with. 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. And this is Jesus' own parable. They that were foolish took their lamps, but they didn't take any reserve fuel for them, didn't take any reserve oil. But the wise took oil in their vessels, that's a reserve vessel, with their lamps. While the bridegroom tarried, they all of them, all 10 of them, slumbered and slept. They were all sleeping.